This week, we're talking about aligned inconvenience.
You are listening to Love Your Job Before You Leave It, the podcast for ambitious, high-achieving women who are ready to stop feeling stressed about work and kiss burnout goodbye forever. Whether you're starting a business or staying in your day job, this show will give you the coaching and guidance you need to start loving your work today. Here's your host, career coach Corey Lynn.
Hello, hello, hello. Happy Wednesday. I hope you're having a lovely day. I am here in Sacramento, California. It's been a really mild summer so far, and that's just been so delicious for me. I've been really enjoying it. I've also been traveling a ton, sort of by design, and then some of it is just because Alex Lucchini is traveling for work, and so sometimes I just go with her because my job allows me to work from anywhere. By my job, I mean my business. So like one time she was like, what's the point of having this like business where you can work from anywhere if you just always work from the house? Because like as much as I do like travel, I'm also kind of a homebody. I like to be at home. I like to be in my own space. I like to have like all my like little things, like my desk set up, but also like my very specific olive oil that I really like, my pans, stuff like that. I'm a Taurus, right? Like we like to be at home. We like to like have our creature comforts. Anyways, but Alex does travel for work sometimes. So far this summer, or like, I guess if we include the spring, I've been to Seattle twice. I've been to Southern California once. We were just in San Francisco for Pride, and we're going back to San Francisco tomorrow for a trip that Alex has for work. And we were in Ohio recently to see some of my family, and so I could show Alex my hometown. And then in July, it's July for you, but right now as I record this, it's still June for me. In July, I'm going to Sonoma County, which I love, which has like beautiful forests and trees that I really adore, big redwoods. I'm also going to Savannah, which I've always wanted to go to, but I've never been to. So that's pretty exciting. And then in August, we're going to go back to Seattle to enjoy some of that gorgeous Seattle summer. It's such a lovely season in Seattle. The mountains often out. Like it's really beautiful usually in Seattle in the summer, although sometimes smoky. So fingers crossed that it's not smoky when we're there. Anyways, so much travel, and it actually is kind of relevant to what we're talking about today. The concept I want to talk about is, I'm calling it aligned inconvenience. And basically it's the idea of like choosing inconvenience on purpose when it goes with your goals, when it goes with who you want to become, when it goes with what you want to create in your life. So I think a lot of us probably have a lot of inconvenience in our lives. For one, I'm a person who does not like inconvenience. So I like to cut inconvenience out of my life. So there's going to kind of be two different ways to think about this. You might be a person who has a fuckload of inconvenience in your life. So you may be thinking about like, where can I cut this out? Like, where can I eliminate inconvenience that's not aligned with who I want to be and what kind of life I want to lead? Or you may be like me, where you're like, okay, I cut out a lot of inconvenience. Now, where do I need to add inconvenience back in when it's aligned with who I want to be and what kind of life I want to lead? So if we go back in time, if we rewind several years in my life, there used to be a lot more inconvenience. Back when I had my corporate tech job, I commuted, right, to a different city where the office was. And in the beginning, I did that 4 days a week. Right before I quit that job, I was only doing it 3 days a week, which was great. But still, that was like, I don't know, probably 45 minutes to an hour each way. So even if it was a shorter commute, I think it was probably still at least several hours, right? I'm not going to do the math very well, y'all. Probably, let's just say 4 to 6 hours, right? A week. And that's when I was only working 3 days a week. So if I'm working 4 days in the office, like it's even more. And some people are working 5 days. And I realized like this was before the pandemic. So it's possible a lot of y'all have gotten to work remotely or maybe still working remotely. So that might not be that, but there could be other kinds of inconvenience, right? Like I, for one, still like to go grocery shopping in the grocery store. I like to pick out my fruits and vegetables and like read labels and stuff like that. But I know a lot of other people, they don't like the inconvenience of shopping in the grocery store. It's not aligned for them with who they want to be in the world and how they want their life to go. So they eliminate that by doing something like having their groceries delivered to their house. So that's an example of like selecting out of inconvenience for other people. That's where I select into inconvenience because I prefer that experience for myself. So something I had noticed as I've gone through like and eliminated so much inconvenience from my life is that I was a little bit bored. I was like, okay, I've eliminated so much inconvenience. Like I work from home. I have this job I really love. I moved to this city where it's like very walkable and I can like take these like walks in the morning without even having to like, I don't get in the car and drive somewhere else to walk. I walk in the neighborhood I live in. I feel like I had eliminated so much inconvenience, right? And also Alex and I made the decision not to have children. And so that makes for a much more convenient lifestyle. And I'm not saying that kids are inconvenient. Like I love children and respect them so deeply. And I have the utmost respect for the work that parents are doing in the world. But raising children does come with a lot of tasks that could be labeled as inconvenient. And they're definitely like very time consuming. They're resource consuming, right? It takes time, it takes money, it takes energy. Like you're raising human beings, right? We could go into a whole side rant about how I don't think it makes sense to be raising human beings in small nuclear families, but that's sort of a topic for a different podcast. But again, I'm not actually advocating here for you to eliminate inconvenience across the board. What I'm actually advocating for here is for you to decide which inconvenience is aligned to who you want to be in the world and what kind of a life you want to lead, right? So if I were a person who decided that what I really want to do was like ride horses all the time, then I would probably make choices about adding that activity in. And that might involve inconvenience, like driving to a different area. It might involve like paying fees. It might involve like having to like go through a period of time where I'm not very good at it. This is actually like a funny example because I sort of have decided I want to try riding horses. I'm not like trying to ride horses all the time because I haven't ridden a horse since I was a child. So I don't even know if I'll like it, but like that's something my brain is interested in. That's a place where I'm like, ooh, I think I'm going to select into a small amount of inconvenience to test that out. I also realize that the word inconvenience may not resonate for all of you. For me, I chose this word for this concept because that's like been a blocker for me, right? It was like easier for me to eliminate the inconveniences and to be like, oh, I just don't want to do those. And I'm going to like be smart and figure out how to not have to. But then when there would be things I wanted to do, and this is why the travel is relevant, I really like some of the experience of travel. I really like seeing new places. I love to like look at new trees and like flowers and plants. I love to eat at like restaurants in places I haven't been to or in places I've been to but don't live in anymore. I like to like see people and go dancing and do all this stuff. But I don't like the inconvenience of travel, right? I do not like packing. I don't like trying to remember all the little things I want to have. I'm also like I said, I like being at home. I like having all my stuff. Like I like to sleep with a fan on and like a very specific fan. So when I travel, like usually there's a fan available, but it's like not my very specific fan. Don't worry, I have discovered that I can like play noises on my phone and that is helpful. But so to be able to travel, I have to be willing to embrace the inconvenience of it. And again, I chose that word because that's what I resist. So if there's something else that you resist, there may be like another word that resonates more for you, right? It might be like aligned cost or aligned investment, right? If it's like maybe for you, it's less about inconvenience, but it's more about like, this is going to cost my time, or this is going to cost my money, or this is going to cost like my mental bandwidth. Really what it's about is choosing on purpose where you want to do things that are, probably going to make your life like maybe a little bit harder because the other part of it is like the thing you want that you have chosen as like who you want to be or what you want your life to be like. So on that note, like, where do you think you are? Like, do you think you have a lot of inconvenience in your life and career and relationships, and you would like to spend some time figuring out which of that inconvenience is not aligned and like snipping that out? Or are you more like where I am at this current time, where actually your life feels very convenient, but it feels like you want to add some stuff back in. And so then it's about selecting like which inconveniences are aligned with who you want to be and who you want to become. So I actually had a task that was given to me by my coach, Susan Hyatt, where she had me make a bingo board. It's like inconvenient joys because there are things that like will bring me joy, but that like I won't do because my brain's like, effort, inconvenience. I don't want to. Like one thing in particular is, so I used to live in Seattle. Seattle has this really incredible LGBTQIA2S+ country dancing community that does line dancing and two-step. And I really, really adore it. You've probably heard me talk about it before. And now that I live in Sacramento, there's the inconvenience of either flying to Seattle to go there, or there's the inconvenience of like, I could start something like that maybe in Sacramento, or the inconvenience of going to San Francisco because they also have that kind of thing. They have like a dancing night like that, multiple nights actually in San Francisco. And like kind of figuring out like which of these inconveniences do I want to take on and how often, right? So like we were in Seattle a few weeks ago and I did get to go dancing and it was spectacular. And then like I was just in San Francisco. So like I went to their event and that was interesting because even though going to Seattle involves flying on a plane, which is an inconvenience I don't prefer, going to San Francisco involved going to a new venue with people I didn't know. And so actually that one was more uncomfortable for me. It maybe wasn't more inconvenient. Like San Francisco, I can drive there, right? In probably about the same amount of time it takes to get to Seattle. Depends on the traffic. We have some spectacular traffic down here in California. But like the vulnerability or the bravery factor, I think is a lot higher. So that's actually another thing you can think about. There's like the inconvenience factor, and then you can balance that. And then there may also be like, what else is this going to require of me besides just a willingness to tolerate inconvenience? So in addition to tolerating inconvenience, I had to tolerate like the discomfort of going somewhere new and not knowing anybody. Whereas when I go through the inconvenience of going to Seattle, I get the delight of there being so many people I already know there. Of course, there are new people too, but I know a lot of people in that community. A lot of people like already have like great people to dance with. I know how to get around the city, stuff like that. And this applies for all kinds of stuff, right? It applies for like inconvenient joys, which is what that bingo board was for me that Susan Hyatt had me make, but can also be like other things, like inconvenient things you want to do in your career because they're aligned with who you want to be and like what kind of career you want to build, right? And so it might be the inconvenience of like learning to code on the nights and weekends, or it might be like the inconvenience of having some very difficult conversations with a colleague or a supervisor so that you can create like a more connected relationship with more understanding and have a better working relationship moving forward. It might be the inconvenience of going back to school. You may be a person who really loves to go back to school and like you're super excited, but there probably would still be inconveniences, right? Or things to navigate. So basically what I'm proposing here is that like not all inconvenience is the same. It doesn't all count the same. And that choosing on purpose which inconvenience you want to select into your life is really magical. Like kind of the way I think about it with myself is like I only have so much capacity, just like there are 24 hours in a day and I like to sleep for 8 to 10 of them. It's like I only have so many hours in which I can do things. And a lot of those hours are going to be taken up by like, like I just said, sleeping or like feeding my body, taking long walks. I have this like limited amount of time and I get to decide what I want to spend it on. I have this limited capacity to tolerate inconvenience. And so I want to be really mindful about which inconveniences I'm choosing. And to me, the breakdown between whether I'm choosing an inconvenience or not, is it aligned to who I want to be? Is it aligned to the kind of life I want to live? Is it aligned to the kind of career I want to have? Is it aligned to the kind of relationships I want to have? I've spoken before on the podcast about like Alex and I do so much together on like creating connection and creating intimacy through and alongside of conflict. And so that's an inconvenience I choose because there are times when a conflict is brewing when of course I'd rather not. It's like not what I necessarily like would like to do with my next 20 minutes, but because of my connection orientation and because of my commitment to the relationship and to who I want to be in the relationship, I choose to show up for that inconvenience. Like even if I'm tired or like even if it's not what I would prefer to be doing in that moment or I had other plans or something. Now, I can already just hear the objections that like you don't get to choose which inconveniences you have. And like I want to say sort of like a yes and a no to that. Of course, that's a both and kind of vibe around here. There are some things in life that are outside of our control, obviously, but there's a lot that's inside of our control. And whenever we think about what we quote unquote have to do, oftentimes a lot of what we believe we have to do is informed by the socialization that we received. And so there may be things in your life that you are like, oh, I have to do that because if I didn't, like, what would people think? And if the thing is like, what would people think? That usually indicates to you that you do have choice there and you have been choosing to do that inconvenience because if you don't, other people may have thoughts. And if you like that reason, that's perfectly fine. But there are other things too, where like we do live in an imperfect world. I've spoken on the podcast before about like I live in the United States where like health insurance is tied to jobs for a lot of people. And, you know, we live in a capitalist society and like it does require money to like get like food and shelter and stuff like that generally. So it's not about beating yourself up if there are inconveniences that you don't prefer, but you're keeping for now. I think it's more about stepping into a space of power in your own narrative and being honest with yourself about the choices you do have and being willing to question why you do things and if you want to keep doing them and being willing to make different choices than other people, even if they may like have thoughts about it or talk shit about it. I realize that making unconventional choices isn't for everybody, but I just want it to be available as an option for you. If you want to make them, you are allowed and you can do that. And yeah, other people may have thoughts and you're still allowed to do it. That being said, like sometimes it is uncomfortable and sometimes it does involve a lot of internal and external work to navigate that. And as with all things, like you don't have to start with like big sweeping changes to your life. And in fact, I don't recommend that because that's usually not very sustainable and it can feel kind of very alarming to like your nervous system. So instead, I recommend like little tiny changes. You know, we have that teaching too small to fail where you pick like little tiny things that are easier to do than they are to not do because they're so tiny. And that's the kind of changes I would suggest starting with. If you have a lot of inconveniences in your life and you want to shrug some of those off, maybe you can start by like making little teeny changes about which inconveniences you're no longer available for. And if you're in the other position where, you know, you're more like where I am in my life, where you're like, wow, I've eliminated so many inconveniences and that's been really great. And now I feel rested and actually I'm kind of bored and I would like to do some shit. And the shit I would like to do is probably going to involve some inconvenience. Then you can make little teeny changes as well of like dipping your toe into like, oh, you know, it's kind of like the thing with the horses. Like part of me would like to ride horses. Okay. So like, what's the tiniest step I can take towards that? What's the tiniest amount of inconvenience I can add in so I can test and learn and see if I like that and see if that's something where I want to invest more inconvenience. And as with all things on the podcast, like when we talk about it on the podcast, it might sound like really easy and straightforward. And that doesn't always mean it's easy to apply. When we go to apply the teachings from the podcast, a lot of blockers can come up, a lot of obstacles can come up, a lot of internal objections can come up. And that's why, in addition to the podcast, I work with people one-on-one, I work with people in small groups, and I do my free group coaching calls so that I can help walk you through this because I know firsthand how easy it can be to talk about these things and then how difficult it can be to apply them and to make the changes in your own life. So I do have a free group coaching call coming up on July 25th at 12 p.m. Pacific, and you can sign up for that. I have a link in the show notes, but there's also going to be a link on my Instagram in that like little link tree in the bio. So you can sign up there. I am currently accepting one-on-one clients. So if you want to come work with me in a private, cozy container, we can do that. And I'm also signing clients for the next round of Satisfied as Fuck small group. It starts in the fall. It's going to be spectacular. And I would love to have you in any or all of these offerings. All right, that's what I have for y'all this week. Have a lovely Wednesday, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Love Your Job Before You Leave It. We'll have another episode for you next week. And in the meantime, if you're feeling super fired up, head on over to CoreyLynn.com for more guidance and resources.